Think you've seen every cruel betrayal? Prepare to be shocked. A powerful husband secretly orchestrates the perfect stroke to unmask a knifeless killer, his dream wife and accomplice. From the switched whiskey glass, the unlabeled pill, to the hidden camera that records every breath, the chilling drama not only lands Hayley and Randy in jail, but also exposes the chilling truth about how trust is turned into insurance money. This isn't a black and white story. It's an arena where justice smells like handcuffs, and anger turns good people into sophisticated manipulators. This article will lay bare motives, peel back layers of lies, and push all the characters to the brink where every decision has a bloody price. Bill had always believed that the strongest person in the room wasn't the one who shouted the loudest, but the one who could cage the storm churning behind a calm gaze. In recent months, that calm had turned into a varnish brushed over a widening crack. Every clock in the mansion kept perfect time, every meal arrived on the dot, every meeting ended with handshakes measured to the inch, yet the pulse inside his chest drifted off its old axis. Each night he folded into the dark with a lump of anger cooling into iron. He didn't uncover Hayley and Randy's plan by chance but through a string of ruthless, disciplined choices, shifting security shifts without notice, auditing access to insurance files, salting the system with decoy contracts, and tracing the lunch-hour migration of emails. A stray mark on a hastily printed note, a bottle of sleeping pills that didn't match the prescription, a faint lipstick smear on a whiskey glass Hayley would never touch because she claimed to loathe oak, tiny signs fused into a canvas that contained the intent to kill without knives or guns. Bill's anger began as fire, calcified into stone, then melted into a slow lava that ate through anything once called love. He chose what few could dare. To feign a stroke in front of a woman who had vowed to tend him to his last breath, to stage a flawless play so the schemers would blunder into their own snare. Not for the cheap thrill of revenge, but to stare directly at the anatomy of betrayal and redefine justice in a world where law often arrives second to relationships greased by money and power. The script started on a Friday, when a board meeting ran just long enough for him to come home late, exhausted and silent, offering Hayley a perfect stage for her final step. He left a medicine cabinet ajar, a scratch on the safe's lock, the comfort that everything had clicked into place on the eve of a new insurance rider. The whiskey decanter had been switched for a treated replica, the unmarked pill had been replaced with a harmless compound, a secondary camera and medical-grade heart monitor fed data to a private legal server. Bill knew every contour of the house like his palm, and when Hayley reached for the bottle with the poise of someone well-rehearsed, the shadow inside him wasn't fear of dying but the dread of losing all faith in the possibility of redemption. He let himself collapse with a calculated fall, breathing shallow, chest tight, pulse slowed by a sedative protocol his personal physician had consented to under a lawful emergency evac plan. Signals fired, an ambulance screamed in, anxious faces pooled in the doorway, and Hayley stood rooted in the center of the room, eyes wider than usual, whether from terror or from shock at the speed of the unraveling, he could not tell. In the hospital, Bill didn't sleep. He hung between fatigue and vigilance, staring at the white ceiling like a mirror for the new coldness taking root in his heart. The doctors announced a critical condition according to the agreed script. Financial crimes investigators received an anonymous dataset about peculiar reserve transfers over the last 6 weeks. The insurer was ordered to freeze processing on his policy. Randy exposed himself with the impatience of a man addicted to shortcuts. He appeared near the ICU, barked clipped directives over a burner phone to Hayley, unaware that every sound was being recorded, every footstep tagged. Bill lay motionless, but the anger inside him roused like a quiet beast catching blood on the wind and realizing the hunter had wandered into the pit. He gritted through the patient's role, a man half paralyzed, and let the world around him begin to tell the truth on its own. By the third day, warrants were issued. Randy was arrested while trying to dump insurance data onto a bargain bin encrypted drive. Hayley was cuffed amid a scrum of cameras, immaculate hair torn loose, high heels clacking against cold tile. There was no applause for the scene's finale, because Bill's play didn't end with a curtain, it opened onto a filthy backstage he hadn't bargained for. The prosecutor wanted noise to score points, the insurer sought to crown him the face of an anti-fraud campaign, the board split, half afraid of reputational fallout, half eager to use his health event to unseat him. A housekeeper whispered she'd seen Hayley crying in the squad car. An old colleague texted to ask if he had cheated first. Instead of relief, Bill felt the incision of anger deepen, because justice never arrives alone, it always collects a toll from the soul. In the nights that followed, corridor lights streamed across the hospital's ceiling like white rivers. Bill counted the hard choices he was cornered into. He could submit every shred of proof and push the prosecutor toward the maximum, consigning Hayley and Randy to decades behind bars, stamping a chilly signature on the last page of this story. He could negotiate, buying media silence to spare the corporation and preserve market value, so long as he accepted that they would lawyer their way toward lighter punishment. Or he could attempt the unthinkable, pull the most intimate evidence, leave a path for Hayley to walk out. Not as forgiveness, but as a way to keep whatever was left of his own humanity. Each route exacted a price: shareholders' suspicion, fury from families entangled in Hayley's prior gray schemes, the disgust of those whose loyalty had once stood between him and the world. Betrayal, once lit, doesn't remain a private fire, it becomes a boulder dropped into a lake, and the ripples ram the shorelines of your public life. Bill's anger did not explode, it organized itself. He started by interrogating the man in the glass. What in him taught Hayley that such an ugly solution could suffice? What in his solitude, in his habit of structuring life like an investment plan, hollowed a space for a woman to make pretense a profession? He replayed evenings where she delivered perfect meals, the way she wiped an invisible mote from the table, the crease between her brows when he checked his phone mid-course, and wondered whether that had been love or a metronome calibrating a plot. In those cross-sections of memory, fury ran with exhaustion, as if he too had helped forge the cage intended to trap him. Then he returned to the primal choice, staging a stroke as reprisal. It was a sound move, and an indelible blot on his moral file. At the first hearing, Hayley wore plain clothes and looked small against the wooden pews. Randy wore the dull defiance of a man who believes he can bargain. Their lawyers argued that Bill engineered everything, that this was a power struggle in disguise, that she was the sacrificial object pinned beneath a bottomless ambition. Bill's digital evidence was cross-examined, the camera frames, the access logs, all combed for seams. He sat upright, knuckles white, watching truth stretch into rope, each side hauling. His anger chilled into rigid discipline, no muscles twitching, no breath out of cadence, letting the facts he'd pre-assembled speak where his scalding emotions could not. He knew that if he detonated now, he'd shatter what could never be rebuilt. But the fairness of the law did nothing to quiet the whispers in his head. He began to suspect he was punishing Hayley not only for her crime against him but for the crime against his own illusions. He had believed he could sand his inner fissures smooth with a marriage arranged by reason, that loyalty might be purchased by generosity, that old wounds would knit if mounted in a new structure. Her betrayal became a verdict on the architecture of his life, therefore the penalty he craved for her swelled beyond what was necessary. Was he using the court to sanitize a private act of vengeance? The question dragged him deeper into conflict, conscience on one side, and on the other the ravenous wish to see the hand that had traced his lifeline pay in full. Meanwhile, Randy's curated ruthlessness fractured to show a darker mosaic: debts, contacts with tiger shark brokers, a few calls to a small-time medical records peddler. This wasn't a hurried con but a long game, funded and outfitted with exit ramps. Hayley wasn't alone, yet she wasn't purely a victim either, both architect and passenger on a current she helped carve. Bill watched and recognized the loop of deceit. Everyone claimed a dividend, including him, by arranging the truth to favor his side. The urge to smash everything swelled, but he tamped it down, converting it into energy for vetting every clause in every brief, haggling with sureties, and filling the sinkholes that could swallow the company if he slipped. Then came a night, after the hospital released him with a team of nurses on rotation, when Bill walked the long carpeted hall and stood before the room where Hayley once hung gallery-perfect photos. He opened the closet, counted the missing hangers, touched a half-used perfume bottle, listening as if to the old promises, not to indulge nostalgia but to measure the damage anger had done. Legal victory would not end this. he had to live in a house that knew too much about him. So he chose again. Relocate patterns, reroute pathways, change every code, destroy the habits that had accidentally scaffolded a crime. Each decision felt like peeling off a thin layer of skin, painful, necessary, because only when every rut is shattered can the future be kept from repeating what the past just taught. At the next hearing, a variable entered. Randy proposed a deal, offering detailed accounts of roles, accomplices, and trickle-down laundering in exchange for a lighter sentence. Hayley was stranded. Her counsel pivoted toward humanizing the bench, childhood fractures, clinical history, the soft music of mitigation. Bill listened, face guarded, but inside his anger drained into a wintry void. He had thought satisfaction would bloom once the betrayers buckled. Instead he found emptiness, no argument, no tears, no rationale restoring the quiet afternoons that had evaporated. Fairness, in the end, had the metallic smell of cuffs, the scratch of charging documents, the white-hot flare of flashbulbs, but none of the warmth the heart asks for. Those around him picked sides, seeding the next layer of conflict. Some said he'd gone too far, counterfeiting illness to bait a confession, that justice ought not be born from trickery, no matter how guilty the condemned. Others cheered him, citing it as a warning to anyone who would convert another's trust into a line item. Bill listened to all of it without defense or apology, knowing that explanations now cut both ways. He focused on the work ahead, shielding the company from retaliatory suits, the assets from reprisal strikes, himself from the impulse to erase everything linked to Hayley, from her name in his contacts to the chair she used to sit in. At the interim ruling, the judge ordered Hayley held pending trial and transferred Randy to another facility for his safety. The courtroom doors swung shut, the crowd dispersed like rain streaking off asphalt, and Bill stepped into a sky the color of unspilled storm, flanked by buildings that stood like silent pieces on a metropolitan chessboard. He realized his anger had finished a cycle, flaring, congealing, then settling into glacial stillness. He was not ready to forgive, might never be, but he was willing to admit a new truth. Betrayal isn't measured solely by another's act, it is measured by who you become while facing it. Back home, he locked the files away, ordered non-essential camera copies purged, retained only the core chain for the legal team. He sat by the window, regarding the geometry of a perfectly trimmed garden, and let his thoughts travel without urgency. In the dark, he finally allowed himself to name the softer parts, the fear of aging alone, the wounded pride of choosing the wrong person, the self-contempt for turning love into a safe transaction, the bitterness of learning that justice never comes without a bill. Those contradictions would not resolve in a night, but they outlined his next life: vigilance without petrifying into stone, principle without eroding the human core, closure without letting anger freeze the blood. The staged stroke had driven Hayley and Randy into jail, exactly as he'd designed. It had also marched Bill to the cliff edge where a man must study his reflection. The revenge plot might end in a sentence, but the interior war is the long campaign, fighting anger so it doesn't harden into habit, resisting the drug of control so it doesn't become an addiction, checking the craving for safety so it doesn't choke out mercy. He rose, crossed the room that had been betrayal's stage, pressed a fingertip to the switch, and left behind a darkness newly torn by a thin seam of light. There was no triumph waiting. Only the even breath of someone who understands that the real victory isn't watching others fall, but refusing to tumble into the pit your own rage has dug. And when dawn neared, with it the hearings, the affidavits, the numbers, the next decisions, Bill knew he would keep walking forward, not because he believed the world would be kinder, but because he believed he could pass through it with enough of himself intact not to resemble the ones who betrayed him. As the courtroom doors closed and the sound of boots on the stone floor faded into silence, all false glory fell from the shoulders of those still standing. Hayley and Randy faced bars, but the heaviest sentence hung on Bill's chest, the price of turning justice into a cold chess move. He had won, but that victory had the metallic taste of handcuffs, the bitter taste of peaceful afternoons that could never be recovered. The house knew too much about him. The chair where a promise had once sat was now empty, and the perfectly manicured garden could not silence the noise of memories. Bill understood that the real battle did not end with the sentence, but began the moment he chose not to let anger become a habit. He locked the safe, turned off the unnecessary cameras, and kept only one principle: to move forward, sober, not to believe the world was gentler, but to avoid becoming a copy of the person who had betrayed him. Because sometimes the only victory left was to stay human.